According to Julius Caesar, a coward dies 1,000 deaths every day, and a brave man dies only once. Napoleon said that later on. A coward dies 1,000 deaths every day, but a brave man only dies once. It's a stark choice that we have to make in life on how to live. And Jack London's story, In a Far Country, is a good illustration of this. Jack London was writing about the gold rush, 1800s, and he, as a young man, he went off to the Klondike and passed across hundreds of miles of the Yukon and the frozen tundra and the bleak stretches that would go on as far as the eye could see, the white silence, the white death, and the fear of the stillness that would lay upon the land. And so London went up there, and he went up there for a while, and he eventually came back and became a writer and was inspired by his experiences up there. And one of his stories, In a Far Country, is about a couple of city people men from the city who did the same thing. You've got this one person who, basically he's been, he's a work beast. He's somebody who's just worked himself through the grind for so long he just can't take it anymore, and that's his motivation for going up to Alaska. Just he wants to escape the grind. And the other one, we've got another character doing it for essentially romance, in terms of meaning adventure. And so we've got these two city people. Really, they haven't been hardened by life to the extent that they haven't been shaped by the kind of adversity that they're going to be facing up in the Yukon, where men are pressed to the uttermost depths of their souls, and when they have to face life and death decisions, which are never easy decisions. And so in this case, they're on this journey, and it's a long journey across the tundra, hundreds of miles, and they at certain point, London writes, at the Great Bear, overcome by the common dread of the unknown lands, their voyagers began to desert. So what's happening is this is so brutal and so long and so trying that men start quitting. They give up and they head back. That doesn't mean they make it back, but they either drop on the trail and die, or they head back. So it's not easy, and it's harder than some of them expected. And so, it's a little bit like what happened in Israel when Moses was leading the Jews to the Promised Land. He saved them from slavery. The Egyptians were brutal slave masters, and they were running these Jews into the ground, killing them, working them to death, in building the pyramids and the various structures that they're working on. And so Moses saved his people, and he led them in a series of miracles. He led them out of Israel, out of Egypt, into the desert. But then it got hard. It got really hard, and because they were in the desert, right? It's not a great place to be, and so it took faith. They didn't have, things weren't easy in the desert. It wasn't easy to get food. They had to eat manna that would fall from the sky, as a way of speaking, and they had to get water where they could find it, which was not easy. And so the people got frustrated, and they would literally. We had literally had people in the desert who were saying, "Take us back. Why did we ever listen to this person? Why did we ever listen to him? We were happier when we were slaves, eating out of the flesh pots of Egypt." And these people wanted to go back. This inspired actually a scene in my book, The Recruiter. I wrote, he waved for the race. This is a similar scene based on the Exodus of Egypt, where my hero Chuck Brand is saving some slaves, essentially. I won't go into the story, but he's saving a bunch of people from exploitation. And it says he waved for the ragtag band of slaves to follow him. Already the light of hope had entered their eyes. A surge of energy seemed to fuel them. They kept up a good pace. Some were eager to help others. Despite their sunken eyes and skeletal frames and hollow cheeks, many of them limped with a spring in their step. They carried their tattered clothes with royal and dignified pride. In the main tunnel, they looked over on their shoulders, wearily wondering if the guards would show up. But they did not allow their fear to throw them into a panic. Holding Lydia close as he drove, Chuck saw smiles on many of their dirty and bruised faces. When they came to a big cavern, he looked up at a flatbed trailer to the backhoe. An able-bodied helped to load up the weak and the wounded. Lydia helped an old man who could barely walk. I'm almost there. The clatter of gunfire startled Chuck and others. A couple of women and several men cringed like beaten dogs. "We no should leave back there," a skeletal man said. "Now for sure we die." "I wish I never see him face," a woman said, spitting toward Chuck. Okay, so here he's rescued him, and they're all of a sudden realizing that the guards might show up, and they're going to be these are brutal people, and so they're all of a sudden fear is setting in, and these people are afraid that they're going to possibly be punished by these ruthless guards, and they're starting to hate the person who saved him. So it can be tough. So all right, London here writes, the sleds groaned by on their steel rod runners, and the dogs strained low in the harness which they were born to die. Now here, this is a minor scene here. You've got these dogs, and London writes they were born to die. They're strapped into their harness, and they're born to die. These dogs. They're not even mentioned again. So this is a very minor point here, and yet it's really crucial. It's a really crucial throwaway line here, because it says they were born to die, and really a theme of this story is that and also a theme of the Bible is you need to die in order to live. You need to die in order to live. If you're focused on living and not prepared to die, then you have to live as a coward. And a coward dies 1,000 deaths. But the brave man only dies once, because he's already died. His life is already over in a psychological sense. He's made the sacrifice, and now he's ready to fight without fear. When I say without fear, that doesn't mean there's no fear, but there is such thing as courage in the face of fear. So London writes, to all this was added a new trouble, the fear of the North. So the fear of the North, the fear of being hundreds of miles from anywhere, isolated in 40 below, 60 below, where the cold destroys and kills, and there's no hope, and screams into the vastness are silent, and they're not heard by anybody or anything, and there's death, and that's the fear of the North. Weatherby, one of these two weak characters from the South, Weatherby fell prey to the grosser superstitions and did his best to resurrect the spirits which slept in the forgotten graves. So what happened is these characters had come upon a cabin, and there was a couple of graves there. Now Weatherby, and he's being tried to the uttermost of his soul, and what does he do? He has a choice between faith and fear. But does he turn to God in prayer? No. What he does is he summons the dead. He summons demons out of these graves. And so, right shortly thereafter, it says, then he would sit up. Cuthbert. This is the other one. Cuthbert is locked in a cabin with this guy who's summoning demons, and that's not for a good place to be. When he's awakened, invariably he'd grab his revolver, and he's holding his revolver because he's got this psychopath summoning demons. So a little bit of fear in that kind of situation is not a bad thing. You just have to control the fear. London writes, he dwelt upon the unseen and the unknown till the burden of eternity appeared to be crushing him. That's the burden of fear. That's the 1,000 deaths every day. He lived with death among the dead. He lived with death among the dead. That's the 1,000 deaths. Fear laid icy fingers upon his heart. That's no way to live. So London is showing us the burden of the 1,000 deaths. He's showing us what it means to live with fear and not have the courage to have faith and to do the right thing. Many people don't have the courage to do the right thing. London writes, sometimes he became frantic at their insistent presence and danced about the cabin, cutting. So we've got this guy, Weatherby, dancing around. This is the one summoning demons, and he's dancing around in this dim cabin with an axe. And so, not surprisingly, Cuthbert, the other one, is shaking with fear. He's following Weatherby with his pistol, which actually seems like a reasonable thing to do when you've got this lunatic summoning demons and dancing around with an axe. I'd probably be doing the same thing. So it's just because we don't live by fear doesn't mean we are against self-defense. Self-defense is okay. So what happens here? Okay, London writes, still things might have happened differently had not the two dead men come out from under the stones and hushed the hot words of the throat. So in other words, we've got these two guys, and what's happening is they're suffering from scurvy. They have scurvy, and yet on the other hand, they make it several months, and they're actually getting towards spring. So if they just, it's the dark cave. They're immersed in the dark cave of fear, and they have to. When you're in the dark cave of fear, you have to have the faith to beat the fear. General Patton said you have to have the faith to overcome the fear. That means you don't make the wrong decision based on fear, but you make your decision based on faith. Unfortunately, Weatherby was summoning demons, and these demons came, and it led to a most unfortunate end for these two characters. But I won't go into any more detail than that. But that's the main lesson here in this story. We have to have the faith to overcome the fear, because a coward lives 1,000 deaths. A coward dies 1,000 deaths every day. The brave man only dies once. It's Roger Weston. Thanks for listening. Hit that like button if you like this kind of video, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.